You don't notice it at first. It doesn't arrive as panic. It doesn't show up as a failure. It comes quietly, a subtle pressure in the background of your life. You're doing fine by most standards. You handle your responsibilities. You show up. You make reasonable decisions. And yet, money still feels heavier than it should. Not because you're reckless, not because you're lazy, and not because you haven't tried. It's more subtle than that. You feel like you're always managing money. Instead of money working quietly in the background of your life, you plan, you budget, you think ahead. But deep down, there's a sense that your financial life is fragile, that one unexpected change could shift everything, that freedom still feels conditional. You don't talk about this feeling much. Most people don't. They label it as normal adulthood. They call it stress. They assume this is just how life works. But you know better. Because when you slow down long enough to be honest with yourself, you can feel it. Something is off. You've watched other people move differently through money. Not louder, not flashier, calmer. They don't seem rushed. They don't seem tense. They don't constantly talk about money, yet it never seems to dominate their decisions. They aren't working harder than you. In many cases, they're doing less. So why does their financial life feel lighter, while yours feels like something that always needs attention? The uncomfortable truth is this. The difference isn't effort. It's how you think. You were taught to believe that if you stayed responsible, disciplined, and consistent, things would eventually feel stable. And in many ways, that worked. You survived, you progressed, you avoided obvious mistakes. But stability is not the same thing as freedom, and effort alone does not create leverage. You were trained to focus on income, to trade time for certainty, to solve financial pressure by doing more. That training wasn't malicious. It was practical. It was safe. But it came with a hidden cost. It trained you to play a game that never really ends. A game where money always needs management, where progress feels temporary, where rest feels earned, not built in. The wealthy are not immune to effort. They are not smarter by default, and they are not living under different laws of reality. They simply operate from a different mental framework. They see money as a tool, not a reward. They think in structures, not tasks. They prioritize leverage over motion. And most people never make this shift, not because it's secret, but because it doesn't feel urgent. It doesn't come with drama. It doesn't promise fast results. It doesn't feel impressive in the beginning. In fact, it often feels boring. And because it feels boring, it gets ignored. Here's the question you may not have allowed yourself to ask yet. If your way of thinking about money were truly aligned with how wealth is built, why would it still feel this tight? Why would it still require so much effort to maintain? Why would peace feel postponed? That tension you feel isn't failure. It's feedback. It's the signal that your current mindset has taken you as far as it can. This audiobook isn't about motivation. It's not about working harder. And it's not about becoming someone else. It's about understanding how the wealthy think and why most people never do. Because once your thinking shifts, money stops behaving the way it always has. And in the next chapter, you'll begin to see the invisible divide that quietly determines which side of that line you live on. Chapter 1. The Invisible Divide. You don't cross the line into wealth with a dramatic moment. There is no single decision, no overnight breakthrough, no obvious turning point you can point to and say, that was it. The divide that separates the wealthy from most people is almost invisible. And that's why it works. From the outside, lives can look nearly identical. Similar income, similar education, similar routines, similar levels of effort. Yet over time, one path quietly opens up. The other quietly closes in. You feel this difference long before you can explain it. You notice it in how money feels in your body. Tense, heavy, demanding attention, or calm. Background. Supportive, not dominant. That sensation isn't random. It's the result of which side of the invisible divide your thinking lives on. Most people believe the divide is external. They assume it's about opportunity, connections, timing, or luck. They believe the wealthy simply had access to something they didn't. But if that were true, effort would close the gap. And you already know it doesn't. You've worked harder than ever at certain points in your life. You've taken on more responsibility. You've been more disciplined, more careful, more serious. Yet money didn't become lighter. It became more complex, more to manage, more to protect, more to worry about. That's because the divide isn't about how much you do. It's about what your effort is connected to. On one side of the divide, effort feeds systems. On the other side, effort feeds survival. Most people live on the survival side without realizing it. You're rewarded for being reliable, for showing up, for being busy, for solving immediate problems. And this creates the illusion of progress. You feel useful, needed, productive, but usefulness is not leverage. And productivity is not freedom. The wealthy understand this early, often without being able to explain it clearly. They sense that doing more inside a limited structure only strengthens the structure, not their position within it. So instead of asking, "How can I do this better?" they ask something else. "What am I building?" This question changes everything. When you focus on doing, your attention stays on tasks. When you focus on building, your attention shifts to structure. Tasks consume time. Structures multiply time. And here is the uncomfortable truth most people never confront. If your income depends on your presence, your thinking is still on the wrong side of the divide. This doesn't mean you failed. It means you were trained well for a different outcome. You were trained to be dependable, to be consistent, to be efficient. All valuable traits, all necessary traits, but none of them create separation from effort. The wealthy don't reject effort. They just refuse to let effort be the source of their financial stability. They look for leverage everywhere. Leverage of time, leverage of skills, leverage of capital, leverage of systems that continue to function without constant input. Most people never look for leverage because it feels unsafe. Leverage requires patience, delayed reward, periods where progress is not visible. And that feels uncomfortable when you've been conditioned to equate movement with success. You were taught that motion equals momentum, that staying busy means you're moving forward, but motion without direction doesn't lead anywhere new. It only exhausts you inside the same boundaries. The invisible divide becomes clearer when you observe how decisions are made. On one side, decisions are driven by relief. Will this reduce pressure right now? Will this make things easier this month? On the other side, decisions are driven by trajectory. Where does this lead over time? What does this compound into? Relief feels good. Trajectory feels slow. So most people choose relief. They optimize for comfort, certainty, and short-term stability. And unknowingly, they lock themselves into patterns that must be maintained forever. The wealthy are willing to feel temporary discomfort for permanent shift. They accept boredom. They accept waiting. They accept that early stages won't look impressive. Because they're not playing for validation, they're playing for position. Position is the real currency on the other side of the divide. Position determines whether money feels like pressure or support, whether work feels endless or optional, whether time belongs to you or is constantly being exchanged. You don't move across this divide by making more money. You move across it by changing how you interpret effort, time, and value. The moment you stop asking how to earn more and start asking what continues without you, your thinking begins to shift. That shift doesn't make you wealthy overnight, but it places you on a different path. And once you're on that path, every decision starts to feel different. In the next chapter, you'll begin to see how the wealthy define money itself and why that definition quietly determines everything that follows. Chapter 2. How the wealthy define money. You don't struggle with money because you don't earn enough. That idea sounds logical, but it's incomplete. Your relationship with money is shaped long before numbers ever enter the picture. It's shaped by how you define what money is. Most people define money as a reward, something you receive after effort, something you deserve once you've worked hard enough, something that arrives, gets used, and disappears. This definition feels normal because it's reinforced everywhere. You work, you get paid, you spend, you repeat. And as long as the cycle continues, it feels functional. But functionality is not power. The wealthy define money very differently. To them, money is not a reward for effort. It is a tool for positioning. This single shift changes everything. When money is a reward, you protect it emotionally. You feel relief when it arrives. You feel anxiety when it leaves. Spending becomes emotional. Saving becomes willpower, and investing feels risky because risk threatens security. But when money is a tool, emotion fades. Money becomes neutral, movable, deployable. It's no longer about how much you have. It's about what that money is doing. The wealthy don't ask, "How much did I make?" They ask, "What did this money build?" That question rewires behavior at a deep level. If money is meant to be consumed, you optimize for lifestyle. If money is meant to be deployed, you optimize for structure. Most people live their entire lives without noticing this distinction. They focus on income, raises, bonuses, better months. But income only answers one question: how well am I doing right now? It does not answer the more important one: how exposed am I? Exposure is what keeps money stressful. When your financial life depends on constant input, every interruption feels dangerous. Time off feels expensive. Rest feels undeserved. Change feels risky. The wealthy reduce exposure before they increase lifestyle. They don't feel rushed to prove success externally. They are focused on internal stability. This is why they appear calmer even when facing uncertainty. Their definition of money supports that calm. To them, money is not something to cling to. It's something to assign roles to. Each dollar has a job. Some dollars create income, some protect downside, some buy time, some amplify skills. Most people don't give money roles. They give it categories: bills, savings, spending. Categories describe where money goes. Roles define what money does. This is why two people with the same income can experience money completely differently. One feels constant pressure, the other feels gradual expansion. The difference isn't discipline, it's perspective. When money is defined as a reward, spending feels justified. You earned it, you deserve it. And that belief quietly drains leverage, because rewards are meant to be enjoyed, not deployed. The wealthy delay enjoyment not out of sacrifice, but because enjoyment is not the primary function of money in the early stages. The primary function is positioning. Position determines future options. Options create freedom, and freedom changes how effort feels. This doesn't mean the wealthy never spend or enjoy money. It means enjoyment is secondary to structure. They understand something most people miss. Money that entertains you once cannot support you repeatedly. But money that builds structure can entertain you for decades. This understanding removes urgency. When you're not rushing to extract pleasure from money, you give it time to compound. Most people rush because they subconsciously believe money is fragile. That belief makes sense if money is a reward. Rewards can disappear, but tools are meant to be reused. The wealthy reuse money. They let it cycle through systems instead of lifestyle. They allow time to magnify outcomes instead of demanding immediate results. This is why flashy wealth often collapses, while quiet wealth compounds. One is built on consumption, the other is built on deployment. You don't need more money to adopt this definition. You need a different question. Instead of asking, "What can this money get me right now?" You begin asking, what will make this money easier next year? That shift doesn't change your bank balance overnight, but it changes your trajectory immediately. When money becomes a tool, pressure begins to ease. Not because you have more, but because you stop using it against yourself. You stop measuring success by spending. You stop equating relief with progress. And slowly, money moves from the center of your attention to the background of your life. That's the real signal of alignment. In the next chapter, you'll begin to see why hard work, on its own, often leads to exhaustion instead of freedom, and how the wealthy relate to effort in a fundamentally different way. Chapter 3. Why hard work feels empty. You were taught that effort is noble, that showing up every day, pushing through resistance, and staying disciplined would eventually lead somewhere meaningful. And for a long time, that belief served you. It helped you survive. It helped you progress. It helped you build competence. But at some point, something subtle began to happen. The harder you worked, the less satisfying it felt. Not because you became lazy, not because you lost ambition, but because effort stopped producing relief. You noticed that doing more didn't create space. It created weight, more responsibility, more obligation, more things depending on you. Hard work kept life moving, but it didn't make it lighter. This is the moment many people misunderstand. They assume the problem is burnout. They assume they need rest, motivation, or a change of scenery. But the real issue is deeper than exhaustion. It's emptiness. The emptiness that comes from effort without leverage. You can work incredibly hard inside a structure that never lets you move forward. And the more skilled you become, the more valuable you are to that structure, not to yourself. This is the trap. Effort feels meaningful when it creates expansion. It feels empty when it only maintains. Most people spend their lives maintaining income, maintaining lifestyle, maintaining momentum. And maintenance is endless. It has no finish line. The wealthy understand something most people never articulate. Hard work is not the enemy. Hard work without leverage is. Leverage is what allows effort to echo. Without leverage, effort disappears the moment you stop applying it. You felt this before. You take time off, and progress pauses. You slow down, and income reacts immediately. You step away, and everything waits for you to return. That's not freedom. That's dependence. It doesn't matter how well paid or respected that dependence is. If your output requires your constant presence, your effort is trapped in the present moment. The wealthy don't escape effort. They escape dependency. They are willing to work hard, but only when that work builds something that continues. Something that doesn't require constant attention. Something that doesn't reset to zero every morning. This is why hard work feels empty for so many people. It's not because effort is useless. It's because effort is being spent on tasks instead of structures. Tasks are completed and forgotten. Structures remain. You are trained to excel at tasks. Finish this. Meet that deadline. Solve this problem. You became good at it. But task-based success has a ceiling. Once you hit it, effort no longer creates momentum. It only creates fatigue. This is where frustration begins to grow. You start asking yourself quiet questions you don't say out loud. Why does it still feel like I'm behind? Why does progress feel so fragile? Why does rest feel risky? Those questions aren't signs of ingratitude. They're signals. They're telling you that effort, by itself, has reached its limit. Most people respond to this signal by doubling down. They push harder. They optimize their routines. They squeeze more productivity out of their days. And temporarily, things improve. But the emptiness returns. Because no amount of efficiency can replace leverage. Leverage is what allows effort to compound instead of evaporate. It's the difference between lifting something once and building a system that lifts for you repeatedly. The wealthy don't ask, how hard am I working? They ask, what continues when I stop? This question reframes effort completely. Effort becomes an investment, not a sacrifice. It's no longer about endurance, it's about direction. You can endure almost anything for a short period of time, but enduring forever drains the soul. Most people don't mind working hard. They mind working hard without progress they can feel. Progress that compounds quietly. Progress that reduces pressure instead of increasing it. The wealthy are patient with effort because they know what it's feeding. They're not motivated by busyness. They're motivated by accumulation. Accumulation of position, accumulation of optionality, accumulation of time freedom. This is why they can appear relaxed even while working intensely. Their effort has an end point. Yours may not yet. And that's not a personal flaw. It's a structural one. You weren't taught to ask where effort leads. You were taught to value effort itself. That belief kept you reliable. It kept you employable. It kept you safe. But it didn't teach you how to become independent from effort. Hard work feels empty when it doesn't buy back your time. When effort produces income but not distance from obligation, it creates a quiet resentment. You don't resent the work. You resent the permanence. The feeling that no matter how well you perform, you're still required tomorrow. The wealthy feel this too, but they respond differently. They don't try to escape effort. They redirect it. They place effort where it creates separation. Separation between time and income. Between presence and results. Between today's work and tomorrow's security. Once effort begins to create separation, it stops feeling empty. It starts feeling strategic, purposeful, contained. In the next chapter, you'll begin to see the mechanism the wealthy use to achieve this, how they think in systems instead of tasks, and why that shift quietly changes everything. Chapter 4. The wealthy think in systems. At some point, effort alone stops being the problem. You can be disciplined, you can be consistent, you can be good at what you do, and still feel like you're running inside a loop. That's because the real difference between the wealthy and most people is not how hard they work. It's how they organize reality in their mind. The wealthy don't think of tasks. They think in systems. This distinction is subtle, but it quietly determines everything. A task is something you do. A system is something that keeps working. Tasks require your attention. Systems require your design. Most people spend their entire lives perfecting tasks. They optimize their routines. They improve their skills. They get faster, better, more efficient. And all of that works. Until it doesn't. Because tasks end the moment you stop performing them. Systems don't. You can feel the difference immediately. When your financial life is built on tasks, you are always needed. Your presence is required. Your energy is required. Your time is required. And that requirement creates pressure. Even when things are going well, there's a quiet awareness that everything depends on you continuing. The wealthy don't eliminate responsibility. They relocate it. They move responsibility away from their body and into structure. This is why they are obsessed with systems early on, often before they look successful from the outside. A system doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be repeatable. Something that produces an outcome without requiring constant decision-making. Most people underestimate how draining decision-making really is. Every choice costs energy. Every adjustment creates friction. Every interruption resets momentum. Tasks multiply decisions. Systems reduce them. This is why systems feel boring to most people. They remove drama. They remove urgency. They remove the feeling of constant action. But boredom is a signal of stability. And stability is what allows growth to compound. The wealthy understand that freedom doesn't come from doing more things. It comes from doing fewer things, inside better structures. You were trained to associate value with effort. If something looks easy, you're suspicious of it. If something looks slow, you assume it won't work. But systems are not impressive in the beginning. They don't reward intensity, They reward consistency. A system doesn't care how motivated you feel today. It only cares that it exists tomorrow. This is where most people lose patience. They prefer the emotional feedback of tasks. Tasks give you instant validation. You feel useful, you feel productive. Systems delay feedback. They ask you to trust direction over sensation. And that's uncomfortable when you've been conditioned to measure progress by effort. The wealthy are comfortable with this discomfort. They are willing to build things that don't feel rewarding yet. They know that once a system reaches momentum, it feels almost unfair. But getting there requires a different way of thinking. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do today?" they ask, "What structure makes today less important?" That question feels counterintuitive. Most people want today to matter. They want to feel like each day is decisive. But when every day is decisive, nothing is secure. Systems reduce the emotional weight of any single day. They smooth volatility. They absorb mistakes. They allow life to happen without collapse. This is why the wealthy appear calm during uncertainty. Their confidence doesn't come from optimism. It comes from architecture. They've designed their lives so that outcomes don't depend on perfect execution. Most people live inside fragile setups. If they miss a step, things wobble. If they slow down, pressure increases. If something unexpected happens, stress spikes. That fragility keeps the nervous system alert, and an alert nervous system cannot think long-term. Systems calm the nervous system. They create predictability. They reduce urgency. They give your mind space to think strategically instead of reactively. This is why the shift from tasks to systems feels so profound. It's not just financial. It changes how you experience time. When you live in tasks, time feels scarce. You're always behind or catching up. When you live in systems, time feels spacious. Progress continues even when you're not actively pushing. The wealthy don't chase balance. They design for it. They understand that balance is not something you maintain through effort. It's something that emerges from structure. This doesn't mean they never work hard. It means their hard work is focused. They apply effort where it creates permanence, where one decision reduces the need for future decisions, where one build reduces future strain. Most people do the opposite. They solve the same problems repeatedly because nothing changes structurally. They become very good at coping, but never quite free from the need to cope. Systems remove the need for heroics. They replace constant effort with quiet reliability. And once you experience this shift, it becomes impossible to unsee. You begin to notice how much of your life depends on your presence, how much stops when you stop, how much awaits you. That awareness is not meant to discourage you. It's meant to guide you. Because the moment you begin thinking in systems, you stop asking how to work harder. You start asking how to make effort optional. And that question marks a turning point. In the next chapter, you'll see why patience becomes a strategic advantage once systems are in place, and why the wealthy are willing to wait when most people rush. Chapter 5. The quiet power of patience. Patience is not something you were encouraged to value. You were taught to move quickly, to respond fast, to take advantage of momentum while it's there. Speed was framed as intelligence. Hesitation was framed as weakness. And in many areas of life, the training made sense. But when it comes to wealth, speed quietly becomes a liability. The wealthy understand this in a way most people never experience firsthand. They don't see patience as waiting. They see it as positioning. Most people associate patience with doing nothing, with holding back, with missing out. So they rush. They rush decisions. They rush commitments. They rush to see results. And in doing so, they trade long-term leverage for short-term reassurance. Patience feels uncomfortable because it delays feedback. When you act quickly, you get an immediate response. Even if the response is stress, it feels like movement. Patience offers no such comfort. It asks you to sit inside uncertainty while trusting a direction that hasn't yet proven itself. That's why patience feels passive to most people. But to the wealthy, patience is active. It's the discipline of allowing systems to mature. Everything that compounds requires time, not just money. Trust, reputation, skill leverage, structural momentum. You cannot rush compounding without breaking it. Most people give up right before compounding begins. They plant seeds and dig them up to check if they're growing. They abandon structures before momentum has a chance to build. They switch paths because early results look unimpressive, and early results are always unimpressive. That's the nature of exponential growth. The wealthy expect this phase. They are emotionally prepared for slow beginnings. They don't interpret silence as failure. They interpret it as incubation. This changes how pressure feels. When you expect immediate payoff, every delay feels like rejection. When you expect delay, nothing feels personal. Patience protects your emotional stability. It allows you to remain consistent when outcomes lag behind effort. Most people are not impatient by nature. They are anxious. They want reassurance that they're not wasting time. They want confirmation that their effort is worth it. So they chase signals, likes, income spikes, external validation. But signals are not structured. They come and go. The wealthy are willing to go without signals as long as the structure is strengthened. They focus on what is quietly accumulating beneath the surface. Position, optionality, reduced dependence. Patience becomes easier when you understand what you're waiting for. You're not waiting for money. You're waiting for pressure to decrease. You're waiting for your effort to disconnect from constant urgency. You're waiting for progress to become self-sustaining. Most people mistake impatience for ambition. They believe that wanting results quickly means they care more. But caring more doesn't change the laws of accumulation. Time cannot be bullied. The wealthy don't fight time. They align with it. They understand that early stages are about survival, not success. About staying in the game long enough for advantages to quietly stack. This is why they avoid decisions that feel exciting but fragile. They choose slower paths that are harder to break. They value durability over speed, and durability requires patience. Patience allows you to make fewer decisions. When you're patient, you don't constantly reassess. You don't react to every fluctuation. You don't change direction every time discomfort appears. This reduces friction, and reduced friction allows momentum to build. Most people experience constant friction because they keep interrupting their own progress. They change plans. They second guess. They abandon structures prematurely. Not because the structures were wrong, but because waiting felt unbearable. The wealthy have trained themselves to tolerate boredom. Boredom is the emotional price of long-term advantage. If something feels exciting every day, it's probably unstable. If something feels dull but steady, it's likely compounding. This understanding removes urgency from decision-making. The wealthy don't feel pressured to act just because something is available. They know that missing one opportunity is irrelevant compared to staying positioned for the right ones. Patience gives them clarity. Clarity reduces mistakes. Mistakes are expensive when they reset progress. The wealthy protect continuity above all else. Continuity is what turns small advantages into large ones. This is why patience is not about waiting for the right moment. It's about avoiding the wrong ones, avoiding decisions made from fear, avoiding shortcuts that undermine structure, avoiding reactions that trade future stability for present relief. Most people are not sabotaged by bad intentions. They are sabotaged by urgency. Urgency compresses thinking. It narrows perspective. It prioritizes relief over trajectory. Patience expands thinking. It allows you to see patterns instead of moments. It allows you to choose based on direction, not emotion. The wealthy are patient Because they are oriented toward outcomes that take time. They are building lives that don't require constant correction. Lives where effort becomes optional over time. That doesn't happen quickly. And it doesn't happen loudly. It happens quietly, through consistent alignment with time. When patience becomes a strategy instead of a weakness, pressure begins to fade. You stop needing proof every month. You stop measuring progress emotionally. You stop reacting to every dip. You begin to feel grounded, and grounded people make better decisions. In the next chapter, you'll see how this patience connects to risk, and why the wealthy are far more conservative than they appear, even when they're growing rapidly. Chapter 6. How the wealthy think about risk. Most people misunderstand risk. They imagine it as bold moves, big bets, and dramatic moments where everything is on the line. They associate risk with courage, with confidence, with being willing to go all in. And because of that misunderstanding, they assume the wealthy must be fearless. They are not. In reality, the wealthy are often far more cautious than they appear. The difference is not how much risk they take. It's how they define it. Most people define risk as the possibility of losing money. The wealthy define risk as the possibility of losing position. This single distinction changes every decision. When money is your primary concern, any fluctuation feels dangerous. A loss feels personal. A setback feels like failure. Uncertainty feels like a threat, so you either avoid risk entirely or take reckless risks, hoping for a breakthrough. Both reactions come from the same place: fragility. The wealthy are not obsessed with upside. They are obsessed with survival. They understand that the first rule of wealth is not growth. It's staying in the game. You cannot compound if you are wiped out. You cannot benefit from time if one mistake removes you from the field. So instead of asking, "How much can I make?" they ask, "What could cause me to lose everything?" That question feels pessimistic to most people, but it is deeply strategic. Because avoiding catastrophic loss matters more than chasing extraordinary gain. Most people don't lose financially because they were wrong many times. They lose because they were wrong once, and that one mistake was too large to recover from. The wealthy structure their lives to prevent that. They think in terms of downside before upside. They assume uncertainty will arrive. They plan for interruption, not perfection. This is why they appear calm during volatility. They are not calm because they predict the future. They are calm because they prepared for multiple versions of it. Most people build financial lives that only work if everything goes right. If income stays stable, if health remains intact, if markets cooperate, if nothing unexpected happens. That is not optimism, that is exposure. The wealthy reduce exposure first. They ask uncomfortable questions early. What happens if this income stops? What happens if this assumption fails? What happens if this takes longer than expected? They don't ask these questions to scare themselves. They ask them to regain control. Control doesn't come from certainty. It comes from resilience. Resilience is the ability to absorb shock without collapse. And resilience is built through conservative thinking. This doesn't mean the wealthy avoid opportunity. It means they approach opportunity asymmetrically. They look for situations where downside is limited and upside is open-ended, where mistakes are survivable, where failure does not end the game. Most people do the opposite. They tolerate massive downside for moderate upside because they are impatient. They want relief. They want change now, and urgency distorts risk perception. When you feel trapped, any exit looks attractive. But exits taken under pressure often lead to new traps. The wealthy do not act out of desperation, they act from margin. Margin is the space between where you are and where danger begins. Time margin, financial margin, emotional margin. Margin gives you the ability to wait, to observe, to decline. Declining is one of the most underrated forms of intelligence. The wealthy say no far more often than they say yes. not because opportunities are rare, but because bad risks are common. They understand that risk is not evenly distributed. Some risks are fatal, others are instructive. They avoid fatal risks. Most people cannot tell the difference because they only evaluate risk emotionally. How exciting does this feel? How afraid am I of missing out? How much pressure do I feel right now? These are terrible metrics. Fear and excitement often coexist, and both distort judgment. The wealthy step back. They ask quieter questions. Does this decision increase my dependence or reduce it? Does it create fragility or stability? Does it add complexity or remove it? If a decision increases dependence, it is riskier than it looks. If it adds fragility, it is riskier than it sounds. This is why the wealthy often move slowly. They don't need action to feel alive. They need alignment. They would rather miss 100 opportunities than accept one that compromises their position. Position is everything. Position determines how much uncertainty you can tolerate, how much volatility you can absorb, how long you can wait. Most people think the wealthy take big risks because they see the wins. They don't see the invisible restraint behind those wins, the careful sizing, the controlled exposure, the refusal to bet the core on the optional. The wealthy separate survival capital from growth capital. They protect the base ruthlessly. They never confuse money meant to keep them safe with money meant to explore upside. Most people blend these together. They gamble with what they cannot afford to lose because they haven't built a buffer. And without a buffer, every decision feels heavy. Heavy decisions create stress. Stress narrows thinking. Narrow thinking increases error. This is the cycle the wealthy avoid. They design their lives so mistakes are absorbable. So learning does not require collapse. So progress can continue even when something goes wrong. That is real confidence, not bravado, not boldness. Quiet assurance built on preparation. When you begin thinking this way, risk stops feeling thrilling or terrifying. It becomes technical, a matter of structure, of sizing, of consequence. You stop asking, "Will this work?" and start asking, "What happens if it doesn't?" That shift alone changes your relationship with uncertainty. And once uncertainty stops controlling your emotions, your decisions become clearer. In the next chapter, you'll see why most people never make this shift. How psychological comfort, social conditioning, and fear of standing apart quietly keep them on the wrong side of the divide. Chapter 7. Why most people never shift. You might assume that once people understand how wealth actually works, they would naturally change the way they think. But that rarely happens. Not because the ideas are complex, not because the path is hidden, and not because people are incapable. Most people never shift because the old way of thinking feels safe. Familiarity is powerful. Even when a system produces stress, it still provides something the unknown cannot. Predictability. You know what effort feels like. You know what busyness feels like. You know how to survive inside routines that demand your presence. That familiarity becomes comforting, even when it's exhausting. The shift required to build wealth is not just financial, it's psychological. It asks you to let go of identities that once protected you. Being responsible, being reliable, being needed. These traits are rewarded early in life. You're praised for working hard, for being dependable, for sacrificing now for later. And that praise becomes part of who you are. So when you encounter ideas that challenge effort-based living, they don't just challenge your strategy, they challenge your self-image. If you stop equating effort with value, what does that say about all the years you spent working hard? If leverage matters more than discipline, what does that mean about the sacrifices you made? This is where most people quietly retreat. Not because they disagree intellectually, but because agreement would force a reckoning with the possibility that loyalty to effort may have kept them busy instead of free. That realization is uncomfortable. So the mind protects itself. It rationalizes. It won't work for me. That's risky. That's for other people. I'm not there yet. These thoughts feel reasonable, but they all serve the same function. They keep you where you are. Social conditioning reinforces this. Most environments reward visible effort, not invisible leverage. People applaud for long hours. They respect exhaustion. They admire sacrifice. Quiet systems don't get applause. Waiting doesn't look impressive. Building in silence doesn't attract validation. And humans are social creatures. We are influenced by what is praised and what is ignored. Choosing a different path often means losing immediate social feedback. You may work on things that no one understands yet. You may make decisions that look conservative or slow. You may decline opportunities others are chasing. That can feel isolating. Most people don't fear failure as much as they fear standing apart. They fear being wrong alone. So they stay aligned with the crowd, even when the crowd is tired, stressed, and uncertain. Another reason people never shift is comfort with linear thinking. Effort feels fair. You put something in, you get something out. Systems don't work that way. They require faith before proof, consistency before reward, patience before payoff. This violates how most people were trained to think. Linear effort gives immediate feedback. Systems delay it, and delayed feedback feels dangerous. Your brain is wired to seek confirmation. When confirmation doesn't arrive quickly, doubt fills the gap. Most people interpret doubt as a signal to stop. The wealthy interpret doubt as a normal phase. This difference alone keeps most people stuck. They abandon direction the moment discomfort appears. They confuse emotional unease with strategic error. So they revert to what feels productive. They do more tasks, they work harder, they chase visible progress, and once again, they feel busy instead of free. There is also the fear of responsibility. True leverage removes excuses. When you depend less on effort, you can no longer blame exhaustion. When you build systems, you are responsible for design, not just execution. That level of responsibility is intimidating. If something fails, you can't say you didn't try hard enough. You have to examine structure. That requires honesty, and honesty requires maturity. Many people would rather stay tired than face the possibility that their strategy, not their effort, is flawed. This is why transformation rarely comes from information alone. You can understand leverage intellectually and still live entirely inside effort. The shift requires a willingness to sit with uncertainty without running back to familiar patterns. It requires letting go of urgency before there is proof that waiting will pay off. It requires tolerating periods where progress is invisible. Most people are not willing to feel that exposed. They prefer the certainty of being busy. Busy feels controlled. Busy feels justified. Busy feels explainable. Leverage feels ambiguous in the beginning. It doesn't give you a clear story to tell others. It doesn't give you daily validation. It doesn't reassure you emotionally. That's why most people never cross the divide. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to feel uncomfortable long enough to do so. The wealthy are not immune to these fears. They simply choose long-term discomfort over permanent dependence. They accept that the early stages will feel lonely, that progress won't be obvious, that others may not understand their decisions. They trade social comfort for structural freedom. Once you see this, something shifts. You realize that staying where you are is not neutral. It's a choice reinforced by habit, environment, and identity. And while that choice may feel safe, it quietly locks in a future that looks very similar to the present. The shift doesn't happen when you learn something new. It happens when you become willing to feel different, to wait without reassurance, to build without applause, to think beyond what feels immediately rewarding. In the next chapter, you'll see how the wealthy begin this shift in the most unremarkable way possible, by starting small, quietly, and without any dramatic change in their external life. Chapter 8. The wealthy start small. The shift into wealth does not begin with a dramatic move. There is no bold declaration, no sudden exit, no moment where everything changes at once. In fact, if you're looking for a moment that feels powerful, you will probably miss it, because the wealthy almost always start in ways that feel insignificant. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the entire journey. Most people believe that meaningful change must look meaningful from the outside, that if something doesn't feel intense, risky, or exciting, it can't matter. So they wait. They wait until they have more money, more confidence, more certainty. They wait for a clean break from their current life. The wealthy don't wait for permission. They start where they are. Starting small is not a limitation, it's a strategy. Small beginnings reduce pressure, they reduce fear, they reduce the need to be right. When something is small, mistakes are survivable. Learning is cheaper, and momentum can form without emotional drama. Most people avoid small starts because they don't feel validating. There's no applause for quiet beginnings, no visible proof that you're on the right path. And without proof, doubt grows. So instead of starting small, people fantasize big. They plan massive changes. They imagine future versions of themselves. They wait for a moment when everything lines up. But that moment rarely arrives, because clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from it. The wealthy understand this intuitively. They don't need certainty to begin. They need direction. Direction tells them what to test, what to observe, what to refine. They don't ask, "Is this guaranteed to work?" They ask, "Is this aligned with where I want to go?" That question changes the emotional weight of starting. Alignment doesn't require confidence. It requires honesty. Honesty about where you are, about what you can realistically do, about what you're willing to sustain quietly. The wealthy choose actions they can repeat without motivation. They don't rely on intensity. They rely on consistency. This is why their progress looks slow at first. Small systems take time to show results, but once they do, they tend to accelerate. Most people abandon small efforts too early because they don't feel like progress. They confuse silence with stagnation. But silence is often a sign that something is stabilizing beneath the surface. The wealthy are comfortable operating without feedback. They don't need constant reassurance. They understand that early stages are about positioning, not payoff. Positioning doesn't look impressive. It looks ordinary. A small habit repeated consistently. A modest structure quietly maintained. A decision that reduces future dependence. These things don't change your life overnight. They change the direction of your life. Direction is more important than speed. Speed without direction leads to exhaustion. Direction without speed still leads somewhere new. Most people overestimate what needs to change initially. They think they must overhaul their lifestyle, change their identity, take massive risks. The wealthy rarely do this. They integrate change into their existing life. They don't burn bridges. They don't announce transitions. They don't demand immediate results. They let the new way grow alongside the old. This reduces resistance. Psychological resistance is one of the biggest reasons people fail to change. Big moves trigger fear. Fear triggers self-sabotage. Small moves bypass fear. They don't threaten your identity. They don't attract attention. They don't require approval. You can start quietly and still move decisively. The wealthy often build in parallel. One structure supports the present. Another prepares the future. They don't confuse comfort with complacency. They understand that security is what allows experimentation. Most people want to leap before they have a landing. The wealthy build the landing first. This patience is not hesitation, it's precision. They are careful with where they place their energy. They don't scatter effort across too many directions. They choose one small thing that aligns with leverage and commit to it longer than feels exciting. This is where most people lose interest. Boredom sets in. Doubt creeps up. They start asking questions that sabotage momentum. Is this worth it? Shouldn't I be doing more? Why don't I feel further ahead? The wealthy expect these questions. They don't treat them as signals to stop. They treat them as background noise. They know that impatience often peaks right before progress becomes visible. So they stay. They continue refining small systems. They remove friction. They simplify. They don't add complexity unless it reduces effort. Over time, something subtle happens. The small thing begins to support the larger structure. Pressure eases slightly. Options widen. Confidence grows, not emotionally, but structurally. This confidence feels different. It's not exciting, it's steadiness. You don't feel invincible, you feel grounded. Grounded people make better decisions, and better decisions compound. The wealthy don't start small because they lack ambition. They start small because they understand scale. They know that anything meant to grow must first survive. Survival comes from simplicity, from choosing actions you can sustain when motivation fades, from building things that don't collapse under boredom. Once you understand this, you stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop demanding certainty. You begin asking a different question. What is the smallest step that moves me toward independence without increasing pressure? That question doesn't overwhelm you. It invites movement, and movement, when aligned, creates clarity. Not overnight, not dramatically, but reliably. In the final chapter, you'll see what happens when this quiet approach begins to change how you see yourself. When your thinking shifts enough that money stops being the center of your attention and becomes part of the background of your life. Chapter 9. The moment your thinking shifts. The shift doesn't announce itself. There is no dramatic realization, no emotional breakthrough that makes everything suddenly clear. In fact, you might miss it entirely if you're waiting for something obvious. The moment your thinking shifts feels ordinary. That's what makes it powerful. One day, you notice that money no longer occupies the front of your mind. You're still aware of it. You still respect it. But it's no longer loud. It doesn't dictate your mood. It doesn't rush your decisions. It doesn't dominate your attention. This is not because you suddenly have more money. It's because you relate to it differently. Before the shift, money felt like something you had to manage constantly, like a problem that never fully went away. After the shift, money feels more like infrastructure, present, necessary, but not emotionally charged. This is how you know something fundamental has changed. The shift begins with the questions you stop asking. You stop asking, how do I make more right now? You stop asking, what's the fastest way out? You stop asking, what am I missing that everyone else seems to know? Those questions are driven by urgency, and urgency fades when your thinking aligns with structure. In their place, new questions appear, quiet ones. What continues if I step back? What reduces pressure over time? What am I building that doesn't need my constant attention? These questions don't create anxiety. They create focus. This is the moment when effort becomes intentional instead of reactive. You no longer work to relieve stress. You work to strengthen foundations. That difference changes how your body experiences work. Before, effort felt tense, like something you had to keep up with. Now, effort feels contained. You know why you're doing what you're doing. You know what it feeds. You know when it's enough. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. Precision is calm. Another sign of the shift is how you respond to opportunities. Before, opportunity felt urgent. You worried about missing out. You felt pressure to act quickly. After the shift, Opportunity feels optional. You evaluate it without emotional attachment. You ask whether it fits your direction, and if it doesn't, you decline without guilt. This is a quiet form of power, the ability to say no without explanation, without fear, without needing reassurance. That power doesn't come from confidence. It comes from clarity. Clarity emerges when you're no longer trying to escape your present. Most people chase opportunity because they feel trapped. Once you no longer feel trapped, opportunity loses its grip on you. Another subtle change appears in how you experience time. Time used to feel scarce. Every decision felt expensive. Every delay felt dangerous. Now time feels cooperative. You still respect it. You don't waste it, but you no longer feel like it's slipping away from you. This is because your progress is no longer tied to constant motion. Systems are working quietly. Structures are holding. Even when you slow down, something continues. That continuity creates a sense of internal safety, and safety allows long-term thinking. Long-term thinking changes behavior. You stop optimizing for short-term relief. You stop making decisions to feel better today. Instead, you choose what reduces friction tomorrow. This shift often shows up in small, almost boring ways. You simplify instead of adding. You remove complexity instead of chasing novelty. You protect what works instead of constantly searching for something better. To most people, this looks like stagnation, but internally, it feels like alignment. You're no longer torn between options. You're no longer second-guessing every move. Your nervous system calms down, and a calm nervous system makes better decisions than a motivated one ever could. Another sign of the shift is how you relate to comparison. Before, comparison was unavoidable. You measured yourself against peers, against timelines, against expectations you absorbed without questioning. After the shift, comparison loses relevance. Not because you think you're better, but because you're on a different trajectory. When your focus is structural, external markers stop guiding your behavior. You don't need to look busy to feel productive. You don't need visible wins to feel progress. You trust direction. That trust wasn't given to you. It was built through small, consistent decisions that reduced pressure over time. This is why the shift can't be faked. It doesn't come from mindset tricks or affirmations. It comes from lived evidence, from watching your decisions create stability instead of chaos, from seeing effort accumulate instead of disappear, from feeling less reactive month by month. The wealthy don't walk around thinking, "I have a wealthy mindset." They don't label it. They simply experience less friction in their lives. Less urgency, less fear, less emotional volatility around money. That's the real marker. When money stops being the center of your emotional world, you gain access to a different level of thinking. You think more clearly, you choose more deliberately, you waste less energy on noise. This doesn't make life perfect. Challenges still arise. Uncertainty still exists. But problems feel solvable instead of overwhelming. You no longer feel like one mistake could undo everything, because your life isn't balanced on a single point anymore. It's supported by structure. This is the moment where wealth stops being a goal and starts being a byproduct. A byproduct of how you think, how you decide, how you design your life. You don't feel like you've arrived. You feel like you're finally moving on solid ground. And once that happens, there is no urge to rush. No need to prove anything. No anxiety about timing. You understand that you're playing a longer game now, a quieter one, a game where progress compounds not just financially, but psychologically, where each decision reinforces the next, where money fades into the background and life expands in the foreground. That is the real shift, not when you earn more, but when you need less effort to feel secure, not when things look impressive, but when they feel stable. And once you experience that, you don't go back, because clarity, once earned, has its own momentum. And momentum, when built on structure, has a way of carrying you forward, even when you're not pushing. Where wealth quietly begins. You didn't arrive here to learn how to get rich quickly. If that were the goal, this journey would have ended long ago. You stayed because something deeper resonated. A recognition that money problems are rarely about money itself. They're about pressure. They're about dependence. They're about a way of thinking that keeps repeating the same outcomes. What you've seen throughout this audiobook is not a set of tactics. It's a shift in orientation, from effort to structure, from urgency to patience, from reaction to design. This is the difference that quietly separates the wealthy from most people. Not intelligence, not luck, not background, but how they interpret reality. Most people live inside systems they didn't design. They adapt, they cope, they manage, and that works until it doesn't. The wealthy do something different. They step back. They question what continues without them. They notice where effort disappears instead of accumulating. They design their lives so pressure decreases over time, not increases. That design doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, incrementally, almost invisibly, which is why it's so easy to miss. You don't wake up one day feeling wealthy. You wake up one day feeling less rushed, less reactive, less controlled by money, and that feeling compounds. Wealth, in its truest form, is not excess. It's margin. Margin of time, margin of choice, margin of error. It's the ability to slow down without fear, to say no without anxiety, to wait without panic. Most people never experience this, not because it's unreachable, but because it requires a kind of patience and honesty that feels uncomfortable at first. It requires you to stop measuring progress emotionally, to stop demanding proof every month, to stop confusing movement with direction. Once you stop asking money to reassure you, you begin to use it more intelligently. Once you stop trying to escape your present, you make better decisions about your future. This is why the wealthy appear calm. Not because they have fewer problems, but because their lives are not balanced on constant effort. They've built structures that absorb shock, systems that continue quietly, foundations that don't collapse under boredom or uncertainty. You don't need to become someone else to move in this direction. You don't need permission. You don't need a dramatic reset. You only need to start thinking differently about what matters, about what compounds, about what reduces pressure, about what survives when motivation fades. The smallest shift, choosing structure over urgency, patience over reassurance, design over reaction, changes the trajectory of your life. Not immediately, but reliably. And reliability is far more powerful than intensity. As you move forward, remember this: wealth is not something you chase. It's something that forms when your thinking aligns with how value actually accumulates. Quietly, gradually, without drama. When money no longer controls your emotions, your decisions improve. When your decisions improve, your outcomes follow. That is not motivation, that is cause and effect. And once you see it clearly, you don't need to rush. You're no longer trying to win quickly. You're building something that lasts, and that, more than any number, is the real definition of wealth.